judicial activism. Recent past lo judicial activism, judicial overreach, judicial overactivism అనే కాన్సెప్ట్స్ న్యూస్ లో చాలా ఉంటున్నాయి. What do you mean by judiciary, executive, legislature, how they are interrelated with each other, and what is the role of judicial activism, judicial overreach, judicial despotism, and judicial overactivism? You will see in this video. Very, very important. Watch the video till the end. Look at the concept here. When I say the concept, we have three organs of Indian administrative system. One is called as executive, next one legislature, third one a judiciary. Remember, these are the three important organs of Indian administrative system. Look, executive and legislature both are interdependent. Legislature and judiciary, there is an interdependency, but according to article 50 of the Indian constitution in DPSP, judiciary separated from executive. Judiciary separated from executive. Why the executive and judiciary both are separated? In order to ensure free and fair justice, because justice need to be delivered for every person, including a rich, poor, and even a common man. Whenever executive interfering in the matters of judiciary, we can't deliver proper justice. But in the Indian constitution, executive have certain constitutional values, legislative have certain constitutional functions, judiciary is also having certain constitutional functions. Means in the constitution, every organ has the respective functions. Then what is the work of judiciary? The work of judiciary is always supervising or protecting the constitutional values, which means judiciary will supervise legislature and executive. It will supervise, judiciary will supervise executive and legislature within the constitutional limit. Whenever it is exceeding its constitutional limit, we call it as judicial despotism, judicial overactivism, judicial overreach. Such a concepts can be used. And the meaning, executive dan పరిధిలో పనిచేయాలి, legislative dan పరిధిలో పనిచేయాలి, judiciary dan పరిధిలో పనిచేయాలి. They should not overcheck with each other. Why? Because in India, judiciary, the highest court of judicial system is Supreme Court. Supreme Court is the custodian of Indian constitution. Hence, it is the duty of judiciary to protect the constitution of India from the violators. Whenever executive is violating constitution, legislature is violating constitution, judiciary through its judicial activism, it will protect constitutional values from the misuse of executive and legislature. But sometimes what happened is like judicial activism is very good, which will protect the Indian constitution and constitutional values. Judicial despotism is a problematic, judicial overreach is a problematic, judicial overactivism is a problematic. When I say judicial despotism, overreach and overactivism, it will override the functions of executive and legislature, hence there will be a component among executive, legislature and judiciary which will affect administrative system of India. Hence, judicial overactivism, judicial despotism need to be prevented or mitigated. Look this concept, debate over judicial activism. Remember, recently, India is witnessing growing debate on judicial expanding influence. Concern raised about judicial despotism, which means judiciary expanding its control over many things beyond its constitutional limit. Hence, we call it as judicial despotism, which is always a problem. Because of judicial despotism, it is violating the Indian constitution in the name of upholding the constitutional values. And a constitutional values ni protect chestunna nepantoti judiciary can overreach the functions of executive and legislature. Hence, there will be a debate on judicial activism. Look at this. Some of the recent judgments have ignited discussions on separation of powers and whether the judiciary has overstepped its constitutional limits or not. Recently, Supreme Court has given many judgments. In this judgment, it is very much evident that Supreme Court went out of its constitutional limits, which means judicial despotism and judicial overactivism or judicial overreach. Look at what you mean by judicial activism. Very, very important. Judicial activism is needed for protecting constitutional values. What is the judicial activism? It is a proactive interpretation and enforcement of rights and constitutional values. Judicial activism is nothing but it is a judiciary proactive interpretation, enforcement of rights and constitutional values is called judicial activism, which is needed, necessary. Then what about judicial overreach, which is not important for us, which is not required for us? Judicial overreach is nothing but judiciary crossing its limit and entering executive and legislative domain. For example, judiciary should work within its limit, executive and legislature should work within their limits. But whenever judiciary overcoming its limits and entering into the domain of executive and legislature, which is called judicial overreach. Then what is judicial despotism? When you say despotic rule, which is not listening to anyone, it is more or like acting like monarch. Look at judicial despotism, unchecked judicial dominance over the organs. What is unchecked? Which means uncontrolled judicial dominance over executive and legislature is called judicial despotism. Judiciary become utmost powerful. It is taken up control over the complete executive actions and legislative actions. Hence, we call it as judicial despotism. What is important for us? Judicial activism is needed, but judicial overreach, judicial despotism, judicial overactivism is not required for India. That will affect the functions between executive, legislature and judiciary. Look at now. Instance of judicial activism, which is required for us. And some of the examples for judicial activism, for example, look, directing the states to distance liquor shops from national highways approximately 500 meters to prevent road accidents. మన భాషలో చెప్పాలంటే హైవే దగ్గర నుండి లిక్కర్ షాప్స్ అనేవి 500 మీటర్స్ లోపలకు ఉండాలి, సో దట్ there is no road accidents, because Duncan Drive is always having road accidents. The order ever ichcharu, this order is given by judiciary, which is important for public safety. Such a type of judicial activism is entertained. Next one, providing compensation for victims of Bhopal gas tragedy. In this Bhopal gas tragedy, which has happened in 1989, the Supreme Court ordered compensation for the victims, which is also good, called judicial activism, using guidelines against sexual harassment at workplace in the year of 1997. And there are some guidelines given by Supreme Court to prevent sexual harassment against women at workplace. Important, judicial activism. Granting permanent commission for women officers in armed forces. Earlier, women were not entertained in armed forces. Recently, Supreme Court said there need to be a permanent commission for women officers in the armed forces, which was recently given judgment by Supreme Court in 2024, comes under judicial activism. That is why I say judicial activism is always important. Look, judicial activism upholds constitutional supremacy. Why judiciary is active? It is to protect constitutional supremacy, which means constitution is ultimate all the time. Supreme Court is the final interpreter of Indian Constitution. Hence, judicial activism is important. It is needed. Then what do you mean by judicial review? It is very simple. Judiciary can review its own judgment. Judiciary can review the laws and executive orders that are made by legislature and executive as well. Remember, in India, we have legislature which can make the laws. We have executive who can make the orders. The laws and orders can be reviewed by the Supreme Court, that is judiciary. Why? Because it is the responsibility of the judiciary to protect Indian Constitution. Hence, whatever the rules and regulations made by executive, orders issued by the government, legislations made by legislature can be reviewed by the Supreme Court of India or judiciary. If at all these are against the Indian Constitution, they were subjected to declaring null and void, which means Supreme Court of India can declare the laws and orders null and void if at all they are against the Constitution of India, which is called judicial review power of Supreme Court and High Court as well. But look at this here, judicial review refers to powers of Constitutional Court, which means Supreme Court and High Court, to examine the constitutionality of legislative enactments, which means laws, legislative enactments, which means laws, and executive actions, which is nothing but making rules, issuing government orders. We all call them as executive actions. అంటే పార్లమెంట్ చేసిన చట్టాలైనా ఎగ్జిక్యూటివ్ చేసిన ఆర్డర్స్ అయినా ఇవన్నీ కూడా విత్ ఇన్ ద కాన్స్టిట్యూషనల్ ఫ్రేమ్వర్క్ లోనే ఉండాలి. దే షుడ్ నాట్ వైలేట్ ఇండియన్ కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్. ఎనీ ఆఫ్ ది లా, any of the act or any of the order which is against to the Indian Constitution, such a laws and orders can be judicially reviewed by Supreme Court and High Court. If they are within the Constitution, yes, they can continue. If they are against to the Constitution, they can be declared as null and void. Why? Because Supreme Court will be the protector of Indian Constitution. Is it clear, everyone, right? Yes. Look at some of the articles which talks about judicial review. Article 13 talks about judicial review. I mean to say, there is no one article in the Constitution which talks about judicial review. There are a couple of articles in the Indian Constitution which talks about judicial review. Very important, Article 13, which is a fundamental right. Any law which is inconsistent with fundamental rights can be declared as null and void. Comes under judicial review, Article 13. Article 32 and Article 226, we call them as writ jurisdiction. Supreme Court can issue writ under Article 32. High Court can issue writs under Article 226. So Article 13, Article 32, Article 226, they all comes under judicial review of the Supreme Court and as well as High Court. Next, Article 131 to 136 is also talks about judicial review. Article 137 also talks about judicial review. So what are the articles which talks about judicial review? One is Article 13, Article 32, Article 226 and Article 131, Article 136 between Article and 137. These are the articles which talks about judicial review. But there are some cases which are related to judicial review. Example, one is a Keshwananda Bharati case, next one Minerva Mills case. Keshwananda Bharati case lo Supreme Court went for judicial review. Minerva Mills case lo kuda Supreme Court went for judicial review. Keshwananda Bharati case happened in the year of 1973, which is on fundamental rights, which is also called fundamental rights case. Next, Minerva Mills case, which is happened in 1980. Minerva Mills, they were like textile mills, happened in the year of 1980. This is also with respect to fundamental rights. And meaning, Supreme Court of India used judicial review in Keshwananda Bharati case and Minerva Mills case. Both are related to fundamental rights, more or less right to property related cases. Important these two cases. Let us see Article 142 of the Indian Constitution. This year prelims it is very, very important. What is Article 142? And we know Article 143. This is very, very important, where President can seek advice from Supreme Court, is called Article 143. President can seek advice from Supreme Court is called Article 143. But what is Article 142? Under Article 142, Indian Constitution grants powers to Supreme Court of India to pass any decree or orders to give complete justice. What do you mean by complete justice? For example, you and me have the dispute. Here the Supreme Court can give complete justice, means it will do justice for both the parties. Party X will get benefited, party Y will get benefited, which we call equal justice. So equal justice Supreme Court can provide. That power has given to the Supreme Court under Article 142 of the Indian Constitution. I'll take one example here. One is Babri Masjid versus Rama Janmabhoomi case in 2019. Very famous case. In this case, Supreme Court given a judgment. Yes, that land is belong to Rama Janmabhoomi. At the same time, within that land, some land was given to the Muslims to construct their own masjid. Which means here, Rama Janmabhoomi getting benefited and Muslims can also getting benefited by getting some amount of land, which is comes under Article 142 where Supreme Court can give the order so that both the parties will equally benefit. So this is what about judicial activism, judicial review, judicial despotism, judicial overreach. What is important for us? Judicial activism is needed, judicial review is needed, but judicial overreach, judicial despotism is bad, which will affect the functions of executive and legislative organs.